Our next panel is Italian-American writers. We don't have the title, so I'm going to ask each of the presenters to give their title and what they'll be doing. But we wanted to, after talking with and hearing from, and hearing pieces of some extraordinary writing, these Italian-American writers from the Chicago area. Now we'll have some of the critics or some of the academic reflection on some of these pieces. We have with us today, of course, we all know Fred, our distinguished professor of Italian-American Studies at Queens College, New York. Susanna Cavallo is a professor of modern languages, and she's also the dean of the John Felice Rome Center. She's the academic dean there, and she's a dear friend with many of ours. We also have Christina Lombardi-Diop, who is a visiting assistant professor of Italian here at Loyola University. Also Wiley, also former chair of the modern languages like Susanna. And Samuele Pardini, who is at Elon University in North Carolina, who comes to us today. And you were from where were you? Conversation today. Where part of Italy did your? Tuscany. So they're all going to speak to different aspects of some of the things. Already some of the people maybe we've heard in previous lectures or previous talks. And we'll get started with Fred then.
Okay.
Do you need
No, I'm just going to sit here and for some reason I left my written text somewhere else. So I'm going to see if I have it on my computer, and if I don't, which I don't seem to have on this computer, I'm just going to talk to you about what my... My goal today is to explain to you why you don't know about the writers that we saw earlier, and what happened to the earlier writers of Catholicism, Italian-American Catholicism. There was an article written by John Paul Russo, edited in a volume of Malus by Dr. Mary Jo Bona, who gave a beautiful address yesterday, in which he talks about Italian-American writers and why the Catholicism doesn't make it in American society. We talked about a little bit earlier about Flannery O'Connor wanting to drop the Mary. Well, she wanted to drop the Mary out of her name, not because she had this kind of self-conscious, but because there was this other consciousness of and this intellectual persecution of Catholicism in American culture. I wouldn't go so far as to say as it was as bad as the early persecution against Jews in intellectual culture. But Italian-American culture did not serve well. And this is the reason why you don't know that Pietro Di Donato, in 1939, published a book called Christ in Concrete, beat Grapes of Wrath out for Best Book of the Month Club, and subsequently went on into ignominy. You know, nobody knows this book. Why? John Fonte, the same year, published a book of short stories, Dago Red. He went on to be well known in Italy now, but unknown in America, not taught in schools, etc. Why is it? Jerry Mangione, a couple of years later, right before World War II, writes a beautiful memoir called Montalegro. They wanted to turn it into a novel. He writes this beautiful book. It was produced, it was supposed to be inside the package that went to every soldier who was shipped overseas during World War II. This was the beginning of World War II. That didn't happen. Had it happened, I'm sure his whole career would have changed. But there's three major writers in American culture that didn't make it. Why? Not because they were Italian-American, I would argue, but it was because they're Catholic. And they weren't great Catholics. You know, they weren't holy rollers, as we used to call the real diehard Catholics. But their work was soaked, it was marinated in Catholicism in such a way that none of them could even extricate themselves when they wanted to be these cool, detached intellectuals. And so you find this incredible Catholicism. And that was something that the American intelligentsia could not tolerate. One of the reasons why these guys were also not accepted into the American intelligentsia is because they refused to kind of blindly accept communism. In the 1930s, to be a commie was to be cool, believe it or not. And none of them, as John Fonte said, I haven't sucked out, no, DiDonato said, I haven't sucked out on communism. He became a communist the night that Sacco and Vanzetti were executed, probably out of some kind of euphoric experience with other people. John Fonte went to speak to a writers' congress, and immediately the people kind of pulled him out of there because he wasn't talking the party line. And Jerry Mangione certainly never fell for the party line, even though he was left-leaning. And so these people had these strikes against him. And what we find then in the writing of Anne Calcagno, of Tony Artizzone, and the written paper that this comes from will be published, I guess, we'll work on it. But in this paper I talk about each of the writers that we had here today. And I'm going to kind of recreate it from my own memory, just for a few minutes. In the work of Anne Calcagno, Pray for Yourself, I mean, Anne is not the holy roller writer that's going to replace Mother Cabrini's biography as the model by which all young women become Catholic. But her work will make you think of your own Catholicism. The same way that Tony Artizzone's work will make you feel your own Catholicism, whether it's in his short story called Holy Cards, or the story that, it's interesting, next week, or 2 weeks, I'm going to Italy to teach at the University of Cosenza. These very writers who are in this room translated into Italian. Arcavata, no. Arcavata, yeah. Because this is where Giuseppe's going to be. And so I have to go to Italy to teach them in Italian, and they wrote in English. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. But what happens then, when this experience transcends the kind of little confines of our little conferences here, is that people begin to see this connection between Italian Catholicism and American Catholicism. And the difference is exactly what Anne was saying, that the idea of looking at the Madonna and child. I mean, Italian Americans, we didn't luck out. We lucked out coming into America at a time when America needed a lot of workers. So we all got jobs, we all made money, and by 1960, Italian Americans were above average in income. But it wasn't until 2000 that we became above average in education, and the average education in the United States is a high school diploma. That's it. So what does that say? It says that we built our presence on the shoulders of money, not on the shoulders of intellect. The intellect of Italian American culture is being developed and will go on, and it's done through this literature. A couple of other things. We came to the United States at a time when the United States was moving from an oral tradition to a literate tradition. We still have a tendency to maintain our culture through the oral tradition, which is nice, family stories and so on. But people don't understand that literature begins when orality is translated into writing. Homer, who's Homer? Homer wrote the Who was Homer? Nobody knows who Homer was. Homerus in Greek means the people. The guy wrote his name Homer on there, and we don't really know much about Homer. But he was the guy who translated the oral stories that he heard. The same way that Tina DeRosa is the woman who translated the stories of Taylor Street. Tony Artizzone, the stories of Little Sicily. And you know, these people are taking their stories and they're translating them into literature. And it's a strike against us because of this translation of the oral tradition. So what happens when the critics read their work, they say, well, we've already seen this. We've already seen this with the Jews. We've already seen this with the Irish writers. You know, when Pietro DiDonato came out after Christ in Concrete with another story, Three Circles of Light, you know, we've already seen this. We don't need this stuff anymore. And each culture needs to build that. And until the 1980s, Italian American, you know, I was on my way to writing about Walt Whitman. To me, I got involved with Italian American literature because I'm studying African American, Jewish American, and they're making me take these courses. And I'm saying, you you know, where's the bros? Where's the Italians on the wall? You know, in Spike Lee's film, he goes, where's the bros here? You know, where's the Italians in this room? And they said there are none. You know, and what happens is, we never understood enough to be able to figure out how to counter that by asking our libraries to buy the books. You know, every time I'm met by an Italian American, where can I get your books? You know, and if I have one with me, I'll probably give it to them. But in a bookstore, you know, go to the bookstore and buy the book. Go to the library. Oh, my library doesn't have your books. Tell the library to order it. Where do you think the money comes from? Taxpayers' money to buy this book. So this anti-Catholic movement in the United States, but it's not just that. It's the literary critics who are interpreting a certain form of Catholicism, so when they see the Catholicism that appears in the Italian American, which is a Marianist Catholicism, where the Madonna is focused, and where does this come from? This happens when Christianity imposes itself on the culture that's in Italy, which was a matriarchal-based culture, and they say, hey, you know that woman you're marrying? She's the son of this guy. He's our God. Oh, I mean, she's the mother of this guy. Oh, okay, bring him along. You know, we still worship the mother, and, you know, babies are so cute, and wonder, but mothers have the power. Puzo knew that mothers had the power when he wrote The Fortunate Pilgrim. The Fortunate Pilgrim was a literary success in terms of critics. Financially, he lost it. So what happened? What did Puzo do? He did the right American artistic thing to do. He eliminated the mother. No, actually, he turned the mother into a father, and he made her the godfather. I was on my way to write an article about Don Corleone being Lucia Santa in drag. And then Puzo confessed to Camille Paglia that indeed Don Corleone was based on his mother. Now interesting, all gangster rap in black culture comes out of two movies, Scarface and The Godfather. What if those macho guys who ran gangster rap realize that the gangster that they're imitating is a woman in drag? And these are the unknown things. And so Italian, there's these strikes against it, anti-Catholicism, you know, this kind of xenophobia, this fear of women and the power. Italian Americans have not been accepted quite often because of this focus on women in their books. You know, and I'm not saying the men are, but there's one probably one of the best feminist books I've ever read is Mario Di Capri's Maria. You know, it's Raymond Di Capri, right? Is it Raymond or Mike? Mike, who was that? Mike Di Capri. And so there's this, America doesn't quite know what to do with this stuff. So that's why it kind of sits. And the critics, because it's not something that they learned in their school, in their institutionalization, they're not going to go there. And when I go to Italy to teach, Italy doesn't understand Italian-American culture at all. And they see us as kind of pagans in terms of culture. We have this different form of Catholicism. I always tell Italians, you want to understand your past, come to the United States. I tell Italian Americans, you want to understand your future, go to Italy. I'll leave it at that.
I would like to say two things kind of connecting onto that and on the previous session before I read my paper. And they are that this question of why aren't these writers more famous? Why hasn't this rich culture been institutionalized? I would agree totally with Fred that Catholicism has a lot to do with it. The anti-Catholicism, that still permeates U.S. culture. There also was anti-Italianism, that's for sure. And I was kind of a victim of both. I was telling Anthony Mansueto after he talked about what happened to him at Yale, that I went to Brown University, a very devout Italian-American girl who had had 2 dates in her life, and they were both fix-ups. From a traditional Italian-American home, I thought I would be popular because I was going to the school where people like me loved books. I was an oddball in my school because all I did was play the piano and read. And on one of those dates, the only thing I could think to talk about is, have you read The Stranger? But It's by this writer, Albert Camus. And my fix-up date looked at his friend and he said, "Where did you get her from?" That's why I had only 2 dates. But anyway, I was immediately named 2 things. Syndicate Sue was one name that they thought was real cute to say to me, which I didn't understand at all. I knew what the syndicate was, but I thought that was peculiar. My name was Susanna, not Sue. And the other one was really clever, Little Susie Chivallo. And I pointed out to Anthony that I knew that was a racist slur because my father loved boxing. He was a former Golden Gloves champ. And I used to watch the fights with him all the time. And George Chivallo was the heavyweight champion at a certain point. So I knew by that they were saying, you know, I was really black. So that's one thing. But let's fast forward to Loyola University Chicago. I remember being at a Women's Studies Committee and suggesting that we devote one of our seminars where we read important thinkers to Italian feminism. And I swear to God, one of my colleagues, I'll call her a colleague for want of a better term, I'll tell you later what I really think she was. She said, "Italian feminism, oh, isn't that an oxymoron?" I also remember being at the Modern Language Association Women's Caucus. The subject on the table was mothers. I listened for 45 minutes of how their mothers had destroyed their lives. And it's funny, Joyce Wexler, one of my dearest friends, the chairperson of the English department, said she never forgot it. Because I stood up and I said, everything I am, everything I know, everything I do is due to my mother. Without my mother, I would have been a total flop in life. She is my role model. And they all turned around and looked at me. So, you know, loving your mother, being a practicing Catholic, and being Italian-American in that very strange world of the Ivy League in the 60s. Those were painful experiences, but they made me who I am. I'm going to talk about Tina DeRosa in response again to what we talked about before. The best thing that we can do is teach these writers. Read them, treat them critically with great seriousness, and teach them. My paper is called A Beauty in the Eyes of God. Those are Tina DeRosa's own words. A Beauty in the Eyes of God, Tina DeRosa's Edenic novel, Paperfish. The first epigraph is by the writer herself. On any level, Italianità is religious. The second one is by another Italian-American woman writer, Carol Mazzo. Love of the world is really my main love. This table, this piece of bread, this hand, this afternoon light. The sound of your voice. Like so many Italian-American women writers, Tina DeRosa is far from a household name. Nonetheless, since the 1980 publication of her singular novel, Paperfish, her writing has been praised and written about by some of Italian studies' most well-known writers and gifted critics. Gerda Mangione, Fred Gardafe, Helen Barolini, Mary Jo Bona, and Mary Frances Dino, to name just a few. When at Gardafe's behest, the novel was reprinted by the feminist press in 2003. It carried the original rhapsodic preface by Sandra Mortola Gilbert, and a no less celebratory afterword by Elvija Giunta. Yet another demonstration of its literary significance. Critics lauded its modernist form, its lyrical style, and DeRosa's daring manipulation of time and space, unusual in a genre characterized in the main by straightforward chronological narration and social realism. They also concurred in seeing in Paperfish an elegy for lost times and places, whether Grandma Doria's land lost across the sea, Italy, or Carmelina's Berrywood Street, DeRosa's evocative name for the little Italy of her childhood. Most of the critics marveled at her ability to create 2 complete universes, each with its own cosmology, topography, mythology, and heterogeneous cast of characters. 2 universes that converged in ambivalent fashion in Carmelina's imagination, beckoning yet ominous, light-filled yet suffused with shadows, pulsating with life, and already evincing the delay The street is called Berrywood. Then a kind of dark desperation. Here were no white picket fences, no small houses separated by gardens, but rows of buildings 3 stories high, bricked and set up against each other. There was no light in the buildings, and the rooms, it seemed, always gray. What draws this reader over and over again to Paper Fish, however, is neither its experimental nature, its original expropriation of the form of the elegy, its fairy tale or fantastical cast of characters, and even less, its retelling of the immigrant experience in the process of acculturation, both of which entail untold losses, especially for the Italian-American female. These topics, though provocative, have already been treated at length by some of the great critics mentioned above. Rather, it is Paper Fish's poetry that I wish to explore, for only poetry can embody the sense of the sacred that is at the root of Tina de Rosa's miraculous novel. Paper Fish begins with an epigraph that poses one of the central questions of human existence, the problem of identity. Our images and our memories face each other bewildered in a mirror. Who is to solve the mystery? Who can read these words without thinking of St. Paul? For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. The problem of identity is inseparable from our questions concerning reality. If I do not know who I am, how can I know what is real? Even more reminiscent of Scripture are the first words of the prelude. This is my mother. I just have to show you this. Got all of my terrible scratching, so just ignore those. Here's the prelude. The epigraph is up here. Now look at the large print prelude. This is my mother. First, the words are reproduced in exceptionally large, bold-faced print set apart from the rest of the sentence. Second, along with the epigraph, they comprise the entire first page of the novel. And third, by their elliptical form, they implicitly pose another question. For Junta, and I quote, the opening words of the first section, "This is my mother," stand almost as a subtitle, suggesting that the writing that follows is itself the mother, the locus of creativity that brings past through memory back to life. An intriguing interpretation, however, I would offer a more radical one. Like the epigraph, with its veiled reference to St. Paul, these words cannot help but bring to mind the most solemn words of the Mass. Not surprising, for the short prelude, a term in itself rich in meaning, for it evokes simultaneously the condition of music, evanescent and beyond language, and a feeling of imminent revelation. These words will dramatize the night of Carmelina's conception. Thus, the prelude, like the words of the consecration, is a celebration of spirit made flesh. Sarah's mother cleans, cooks, and engenders a child in an act of love that is described Edinically. This is my mother washing strawberries. These are my mother's hands. Skin that has touched thousands of things now touches strawberries. And strawberries are the first thing she has ever touched. My mother's skin bruises strawberries. Her skin will bruise my father's. That night their skin will make me. But I know none of this. Rarely, if ever, have I heard a more exquisite description of lovemaking, especially marital lovemaking. Perhaps one of the reasons that such reverence is accorded the body is the central consciousness that informs the narrative, that of the child Carmelina with her perpetually astonished and watchful eye. Carmelina has no fixed age, nor identity, nor ontological consistency in the novel. She is simultaneously an idea in the mind of the creator. I exist with the God of decisions, and he is deciding me. Preconception, pre-birth. She is simultaneously that, a fetus growing in her mother's
mother's womb, a newly emergent infant, and the artist as a young girl, whose age ranges from infancy to young adulthood at the novel's close. To complicate matters further, although the tone is similar, there are two voices that merge seamlessly in the text. That of the child and that of an unidentified omniscient narrator who hovers over the family, observing with tenderness its most private moments. If the first-person narrator that begins the novel telescopes her entire life in one continuous flow from preconception to the death of her father 21 years later, the third-person narrator who fills in the blanks is also Carmelina, but a Carmelina distant in time, place, and experience. The dramatic elements of the story derive from this tension. Like most children, Carmelina either misunderstands or understands very little of the adult world that surrounds her. It is only through Grandma Doria who imparts to the child the knowledge of a world even stranger than her own, who speaks on a daily basis with her dead husband, Pasquale. How many of our grandmothers spoke to their dead husbands? Mine did on every day. I need a refrigerator before I go to Polk Brothers. I've got to talk to Tony. So Grandma Doria speaks to Pasquale, who sees in the incurable illness of Carmelina's sister Doriana the presence of the black swans of her native Bosco Reale. It is only through Grandma Doria that Carmelina comes to understanding and the fullness of existence. Such oppositions are everywhere in Paper Fish. From the first moment, the reader is submerged in a timeless universe peopled with wandering gypsies and walking dead. But this universe is also an Italian-American working-class community firmly rooted in a specific time and place, Chicago's Taylor Street in the 40s and 50s. The convergence of these two realities is achieved effortlessly in the opening scene of the novel. Carmelina's mother is washing strawberries, as we have seen. Quote, "In a sink yellowed by all foods, all liquids yellow," end of quote. Although these are literal strawberries made real by the permanent ugliness of the yellowed sink, in a figurative sense, their vibrant color and delicate condition represent the intensity and fragility of romantic love. They are a gift to a husband who still remembers with awe their wedding night. Another amazing quote. On the first night, she had stood there in the dark, her hair and her breasts luxuriant, and looked at him. When he did nothing, she took her head in his hands and held him to her. He wept. Then he heard her voice, calling to him, sweet as an angel. These images of the Bella Casa family's daily lives are what makes Paper Fish so unique in 20th century literature. Like Toni Morrison in Beloved, Maxine Hong Kingston in The Woman Warrior, William Faulkner in The Sound and the Fury, or Juan Rulfo in Pedro Paramo. In Paper Fish, Tina De Rosa reveals to us the inner life of her characters, their dreams, fears, and aspirations, their natural spirituality, equal parts faith and peasant superstition, and their dignity and grandeur despite lives of financial hardship and daily humiliation. De Rosa does this through a sophisticated use of the techniques of poetic composition. Temporal superpositions and juxtapositions that suggest either the vertiginous nature of time or the presence of an eternal instinct. In the washing of the strawberries, we see both combined. This offering ordains the birth of Carmelina. At the same time, however, and here's the superposition, the couple's night of love contains within it the seeds of doom. Superimposed on their caress is the father's last final touch. The skin of my father's fingers touching wood will touch the skin of my mother's hands killing strawberries, and I will begin in the white waters. I mean, who writes like this? It's just so beautiful, it takes my breath away. The arm of my father, okay, which is at this moment strong, which this moment is strong enough to carve wood, will one day scream with pain. That will happen in 21 years. So this is going integration of grammatical and visual condensations, such as sentences without verbs, short staccato phrases, or synesthesias that communicate in a few words an intense emotional state. The use of Christological imagery to summon the divine. The deployment of color and anthropomorphism to create a spectral universe and a circular structure that replicates a life cycle infused with religious significance. So I'll skip just to the end now. So those are the examples that I'm going to be looking at. And one that I didn't mention is a kind of a cubistic technique. And those of you who are students of Latin American literature, if you know the book El Señor Presidente, it's cubistic. The knight is a giant eye that looks down, for instance. She does this. Ultimately, however, Paperfish is not for me, even though it is for many critics a story of loss but of hope. For one thing, Tina de Rosa's gift of poetry has preserved for time immemorial the radiant images of her family and community. But not only poetic skill ensured Paperfish's privileged place in the canon, but also the ability of de Rosa to communicate the deep spirituality that infuses even the most ordinary actions of her characters. For the Mexican poet Octavio Paz, there are only three means of overcoming our temporal limitations, only three means of dwelling, if only for an instant, in a realm beyond time and space. These are the erotic experience, the mystical embrace, and the poetic act. If they differ, it is only in the object for whom our actions are destined. In the erotic experience, it is the union with the loved one. In the religious experience, it is the union of the purified soul with God. In the poetic experience, it is the reintegration of man with his deeper self. There is no doubt that Tina de Rosa's luminous novel, Paperfish, partakes in all three of these experiences. Hence its permanence, hence its universality. Love is seen as something that defies the laws of physics. Religious belief shares with love the lover's ability to fuse with the other. It endures all the indignities, as St. Paul tells us, and it is clearly the saving grace of the beleaguered Taylor Street community and Paperfish. Finally, Tina de Rosa has the ability to make us see in the commonplace the miraculous, to recognize in the most anodyne of acts the workings of the spirit, and to create a novelistic world so fresh, so original, so new as to place the reader for an instant in illo tempore, in the time of the beginnings. Thank you.
Right into this, because I know we are running out of time and I have a few things to say. Hello everybody, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Mark Bosco, Father Bosco, for inviting me, and Dominic Candeloro to giving me some trust. I'm actually going off my beating path. This is an experimental paper, which I hope will work. I'm very, very honored to be on this panel with Wally Finstein and Fred Gardafè, Susanna Cavallo, dear friends and colleagues. My title today, by the way, I'm a Roman, sono Romana, but I am actually originally from Provincia di Cosenza, so proud di Calabrese and Romana as well. And I was born and raised in Italy. I came to this country for the first time when I was 23 years old. And I haven't been able to live since then. I mean, I haven't decided where I want to be, but anyway. So my title today is Tear the Stars from the Sky, Faith and Poetry in Tina de Rosa's Chicago Writings. So again, I will have to go back to Tina de Rosa because I think she's an extraordinary, universal, classical writer, and we have to really promote her work more than anything else. Tina Marie de Rosa was born in 1944, died in 2007, was raised in Chicago's West Side Italian neighborhood, Taylor Street. She attended the Holy Guardian Angel School, a parish school founded by the Scalabrinians in 1903, and St. Mary's High School. In 1966, she completed a bachelor's degree with a concentration in sociology, where, guess where? Magdalen College of Loyola. In 1977, she completed a master's degree in English with a concentration in creative writing at the University of Illinois at Chicago, in the school, in the university that was built out of her own neighborhood. In 1988, De Rosa published the novel Paperfish, which was translated into Italian in 2007 as Pesci di Carta, a few months after the author died, unfortunately. It was taken on by the feminist press in 2003, but perhaps what is less known about De Rosa, and that's what's going to be the concentration, my focus today, is that as a freelance writer, she also wrote the biography of Bishop John Baptist Calabrini, titled, in fact, Bishop John Baptist Calabrini, Father to the Migrants, published 7 years after Paperfish. And this was done while she was a freelance writer. What is the legacy of the Catholic faith among the Italians in Chicago for De Rosa? And that's the overarching theme. I'm also interested in finding poetry and miracles, and you will see how. Italian women for De Rosa are the embodiment of the faith that they brought with them from Italy. In Paperfish, she describes how, and I quote, the dark-skinned Italians, the Italians are dark-skinned for De Rosa, moved slowly down the quick little street to kneel in the church. The street never got too small for them. There was always another corner for the new baby. Move the laundry basket. The church never got too small for them because only women attended. De Rosa seems also keenly aware of the positivist, stereotypical notions present in the sociological discourses surrounding the Italians in Chicago. We heard great papers, especially Professor Lombardi was a really interesting description of Lombroso's and Sergi's and the positive school that described the Italians really as criminals. So in describing the great wave of peasant immigrants departing from Italy in the 19th century, De Rosa expressed this awareness by stating that, and I quote, they do not know that in 100 years, sociologists will make statistics of their lives, unquote. These communities, initially described as highly dysfunctional and disorganized by the sociologists, became the focus of De Rosa's narration in Paperfish, also in order to readdress their image. Departing from a sociological approach, De Rosa writes about the intimate, domestic, and private life of an Italian-American family in Chicago. The poetic intention is especially on women as they live in a world of their own, isolated from their Italian roots, and that's my contention, not yet grounded in an organic, cohesive community. By privileging the perspective of a young protagonist, Carmelina, the artist as a young girl, absolutely, and her little sister Doriana, who is affected by a mental and linguistic disability, the novel adopts a highly fragmented and non-linear narrative structure that veers away from stereotypical depictions of the Italians in Chicago, as either as picturesque characters, pasta eaters, or as deviant criminals at worst. In the absence of any pretense of objectivity in linear narrative, what we readers are left with is this unexpected poetic beauty that Susanna has so beautifully emphasized. A language that in fact is there in spite of the dejection of the Taylor Street surroundings. So this, and I want to say something, there is a long tradition in American literature, this is an American writer, about the aesthetic and poetic potential of urban poverty. William Carlos Williams is said to have inaugurated the genre of the urban pastoral, and at least one of his early poems in this genre, and I would like to read it, but I don't have time, 1913 poem by William Carlos Williams is entitled Sicilian Emigrant Song, and he pays homage to the Sicilians. But De Rosa's version of urban pastoral, if we want to adopt this term, is not simply celebratory. Her lyricism conveys the need for a poetic contemplation of a culture fully entrenched in the mysticism of the natural world linked to its peasant origin. The purity and quasi-mystical quality of this faith, embodied in paperfish exactly in the figure of the matriarchal grandmother, Doria, is endangered in the New World. And I think that's also because this novel is so fragmented. De Rosa finds in poetic language the tools to voice her vision of the innocent and disappearing sacredness of Italian popular religiosity. And now I want to move a little bit more on her biography of Bishop John Baptist Scalabrini. We heard from the Scalabrinis by Professor Candeloro. I won't go too much into what they've done in Chicago. I will actually talk a little bit about their Italian legacy. De Rosa's narrative is fairly linear, as a very traditional biography. She narrates John Baptist Scalabrini's ordination to priesthood in his native Como, Lombardia, a small village near Como. His work as a pastor of the Church of San Bartolomeo in Como, his appointment as Bishop of Piacenza, and his founding of the Missionaries of St. Charles. As we know, the Scalabrini fathers in Chicago encouraged the maintenance of the Italian culture, of the language, as a way to keep the identity of the community. Their history is essentially, as Professor Candeloro has rightly said, the life of the Italians in Chicago and their institutions. Now, De Rosa devotes many pages of her biography of Bishop Scalabrini to, and I quote, the great and somber exodus of the peasant population of Italy, the stoic march towards another land, unquote. And Bishop Scalabrini, and that's what interests De Rosa, actually anticipated the doctrine expressed in the encyclical Ex Sol Familia, which we had a beautiful paper by Daniele Battisti yesterday, by Pope Pius XII. In 1952, 60 years before Ex Sol Familia, Scalabrini believed that immigration was a law of nature, a formal renewal of the miracle of creation, and De Rosa is very interested in that. In Scalabrini's speech delivered in 1898 in Turin, on the occasion of the exhibition of sacred art, the bishop noted that, and I quote from Bishop Scalabrini, "Seeds migrate on the wings of the wind," and hear the poetry. "Plants migrate on the waves of seas and rivers from continent to continent. Birds and other animals move from place to place, but even more do human beings migrate, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone, and in so doing are always the free instruments of divine providence," unquote. Scalabrini was a fairly progressive supporter of migration at the time when migration, the Italian state, was trying to curb it down. There was a fairly tough law passed by the government of Francesco Crispi, liberal government, 1882, law number 5266, which actually made all male Italians living in Italy deserters of the Italian army, and therefore criminals. Bishop Scalabrini had advocated for free immigration in order to, and he was was a very practical man, by the way, to better protect the emigrants from the evil of exploitation, the many abuses by ship company agents that came with lax recruitment. Scalabrini was also famously against assimilation. His motto was religione e patria, for religion and for country. Put religion at the center of the historical development of the Italian national character, of ethnic and national identity. He writes in 1879, "Our immigrants must preserve the nationality to preserve the Catholic religion that otherwise would be lost, and vice versa. Religion and patria are inseparable," unquote. For the Scalabrinians, therefore, the preservation of Italian patriotic traditions was a tool for the preservation of the Catholic faith. Catholic education in the United States also meant for the bishop literacy and education. I think that's why we're here. Such message could not ring hollow to the ears of such highly educated woman poet as Tina De Rosa. In my view, De Rosa's biography of Bishop Scalabrini is motivated by the intimate connection De Rosa believed it exists between faith and writing, between belief, the sacred nature of life, and poetry. In her biography of Bishop Scalabrini, De Rosa emphasized how the natural environment of the peasants of Italy contributed to their religious experience. I have a long quote, I think I will skip. Blessings were said over food, over water. The peasants standing under the looming trees whose leaves were larger than the face of a child knew that everything must be returned to God for his blessing. Living in America, living in the cities, the Italian immigrant could barely breathe. It is hard to see angels in trees or saints at the crossroads when you are living in a tenement in New York City or Chicago. Seeing angels in trees or saints at the crossroads is a vision that can only be achieved through religious devotion or poetic rapture, artistic rapture, as our writer has told us today. The raptures of the art in the churches of Rome is something I'm very familiar with. As a poet and writer, De Rosa identifies Bishop Scalabrini's spiritual force as being drawn from the compelling power of his writings, almost as if writing had a thaumaturgical function, the power to create miracles. And so that's why we have a miracle here for Bishop Scalabrini. De Rosa says, as he writes, the priest is evolving into a bishop, like an embryo into the child. So it's also the miracle of birth. De Rosa describes the moment when Bishop Scalabrini begins to write in 1872 his lectures on the First Vatican Council, later delivered in the Cathedral of Como, as a moment of suspense. She describes all the details of the natural and physical environment surrounding the bishop. The weather, the stillness of the trees, the light on his wooden desk and the shadow of the light. All of these narrative details really create a miracle. They introduce the mystery of a miracle tale. I'm almost done. Writing is also, so therefore, I think I'll skip this. I want to go to my conclusion. I don't want to take time for the other. In conclusion, De Rosa's portrayal of Bishop Scalabrini's life and faith is in part also a narrative of her own faith, an aspect of De Rosa's complex life and as a poet and writer that is sometimes overlooked. She writes about the bishop, he knew that faith is the treasure and that part of the measure of faith is poetry. One must not be afraid to leap into the poetry of belief. Without it, the world would fall into darkness and disenchantment. Earthly treasures might, with great pain or great ease, be set aside. Lose the poetry, and we might as well tear the stars from the sky. Unquote. This poetic vision, which De Rosa sees as being a key component of the legacy of Bishop Scalabrini's faith and writing, is first and foremost also De Rosa's legacy to us. In the spirit of her celebration of poetry, faith, and imagination, as an homage to the contribution of these extremely compelling Italian-American women writers and really classical writers, I would like to end my talk with an encouragement to my students here in the audience, to all students here, to faculty and to the academic community of Loyola and at large, to see angels in the Chicago trees, saints at the crossroads of Chicago streets, or in other words, to not lose sight of the poetry emanating from our inner life and the poetry present in the world surrounding us. As Tina De Rosa elegantly put it, lose the poetry and we might as well tear the stars from the sky.
educational challenges of Chicago's Little Italy, or I'm going to add in the heart of Chicago's Little Italy. The subject of this panel is Italian American writers. He is Irish, Edmund Dunn, obviously the second bishop of Peoria, but he took the name Zifre actually, because his parishioners called him that. He served, before the Scalabrinis came in, the history that Dominic Candeloro, and actually I have to thank Dominic for suggesting this topic and this very interesting source book on here. It is online. The Memoirs of Zifre is online. It is in the New York Public Library. It's a perfect copy of the edition, and this one is easier to download and work with in Word, but it's a corrupted copy of it. So there's a perfect. So you can access this book and use it for this re-avocation of life in Little Italy, just before the Scalabrini brothers moved in 1903. He left in 1903 to become chancellor for the new Archbishop Quigley in 1903, and then the Scalabrini started their operation of Dominic referred to this morning, building the 12 churches for the Italians. He was the pastor of the Guardian Angel Church right when it was built. That's what I'll be talking about here. Okay, so I had fun. So this is mostly a brief introduction to the work and then some key quotations that bring to life some of the things we've been talking about for the last couple of days, especially the conflict between, there's a conflict between the Catholics and the Garibaldi anti-clericals, but also the book is mostly, as I'll explain, about the war against some of the proselytizers, some of the Italians who had become Protestants and were proselytizing the Catholics. Okay. Again, when I say time for sins, I would be very, make sure that I'm out by 12:15. Okay. Before he was consecrated as the second bishop of Peoria in 1909, Edmund Dunn of the Society of Jesus had served the Italian immigrants as pastor of the Church of the Holy Guardian Angel in the heart of historic Chicago, Taylor Street, Little Italy. The Chiesa here's his bio, I won't read that to you. This Chiesa dell'Angelo Custode was the mother church of all the parishes assigned to the Scalabrini fathers, or became that. The parish grew so big that it split into the Madonna Pompeii Church is also in this parish, and was the one that was open afterward. Around 1890, Father Ponciglione, a Jesuit, established a space on what was then known as 4 Quare Street, which later became Arlington Street, as the site of a catechism school that he called the Holy Guardian Angel School for an already numerous group of Italian children. In the mid-1890s, when he was in his early 30s and fresh from Doctor of Divinity Studies at the Gregoriana in Rome, Edmund Dunn became the principal active educator in the Italian community, and in 1898, with the encouragement of turn-of-the-century Archbishop Feehan, he converted a chapel used by the Jesuits into a parish church for Italians. And a year later, in 1899, Dunn purchased the land next to Guardian Angel School and had the Chiesa dell'Angelo Custode built. I couldn't find any picture of it, so there's a location. That was a picture that Dominic sent me of, I think, in front of the school, and that's the style. The other church is just an example of the style that he refers to, that I'll be talking about in the quotes later. It was consecrated that very year, 1899, and in a period of great influx of Italian immigrants, the church grew very rapidly. Dunn served as pastor of the church from 1899 until 1903, when he was appointed chancellor of the Archdiocese of Chicago. At the point when Archbishop Quigley replaced Archbishop Patrick Feehan, Scalabrini Reverend Pacifico Genuil succeeded Dunn as pastor, and then the Scalabrinians and all the idea of the ethnic Italian churches. He was a placeholder. He said because as we've heard before, that the priest did not come over with the immigrants for the Italians, unlike for the Irish and the Germans. As Edmund Dunn tells us that, as we've heard, he opened a dozen more churches for the Italians. The book we are taking a brief look at today, the Memoirs of Zifre, the title is The Memoirs of Zifre, with the title referring to Dunn himself, Zio Pre, or Zio Prete, uncle priest, this term of affection and respect used in southern Italy, and Dunn who had great affection and appreciation for the Italian parishioners he served. And he even argues in the early chapters against the negative stereotypes in circulation are false. So it seems that this is a never-ending battle arguing against stereotypes. He's already right there and saying that Italians are not like what is reported about them. The Memoirs of Zipre was published in 1914 when John was bishop of Peoria already, and its primary purpose was to set forth in a pleasing and entertaining manner some central tenets of Catholicism. So the polemic isn't really that important, or some of the features, but the book centers on the debate between an Italian proselytizer who has left Catholicism for Protestantism and a young student named Pasqualino, who is a prodigy both in the extent of his knowledge at a very young age and at the extent of his debating skills. Here's how Don introduces Pasqualino Amadeo. The Amadeo means lover of God, Amadeo. In the foreword, suggesting that his portrayal of a brilliant young Italian student might seem unrealistic. Some may deem Pasqualino too clever for his tender age. Please consider, friendly or hostile reader, as the case may be, that our youthful polemicist has completed 3 years of classics with unusual success before encountering his adversary. The children of sunny Italy developed much earlier than those of northern climes. Okay, in its structure, the Memoirs of Zipre can be divided into 4 parts. Part 1, the 2 introductory chapters that are of special interest to Italian American studies. The chapters are entitled Italian Quarter and Italian Customs, and they constitute a memorable description of Chicago's Little Italy and its inhabitants, precisely, I think, at the turn of the century, of the 20th century, when Dunn was serving the parishioners. Part 2 is chapters 3 through 8, setting the stage for the debate, introducing the proselytizers who were questioning Catholicism, and Pasqualino as he's being educated in the church school and also in his family life. Dunn adds also a very lively account of how he and the church were being regularly attacked by certain Italian anti-clericals in an Italian language newspaper called Tribuna Transatlantica, and how he would write letters in Italian in the Tribuna. He also responded in English publications to counteract their attacks and slanders. From his point of view, I'd say in the polemics, he's very confident. He's with the Archdiocese, he's a very confident Catholic. So the polemic isn't really a life and death thing. It's just because the book he wrote later on when he was already bishop is a very confident and exposition of Catholicism. So he doesn't feel that he's in any weak position when he's engaging in these polemics. So this book just provides some important documentation to the way that the immigrant community anti-clericism was expressed and responded to by the Catholic Church. And he's very good at responding. Part 3 is the main part of the book, chapter 9 to chapter 25. The main portion of the book are the debate chapters, starting with chapter 9 at the zoo, Lincoln Park Zoo. It happens when Pasqualino goes to his uncle's ice cream shop on Clark Street near the Lincoln Park Zoo, and then visits the zoo where he happens to run into his antagonist, the proselytizer who has seen him before, who's not really named until the end of the book. He's just called the proselytizer or the evangelist, are the 2 terms used to refer to him, who has seen him before at the Guardian Angel Mission School. It was a mission school. I don't think the Guardian Angel School became a real parochial school until 1920, after Mother Green's school that which was the first one opened. But there was a lot of teaching going on of the children, and also their parents would come to night school, and that was a major force of Catholic education. There are a couple of schools right around the Guardian Angel Church. Okay, and so then you have the main part of the Pasqualino first taking on the proselytizer in a number of chapters. Then he brings the proselytizer back to the Guardian Angel Church, and then Zi Prete or Zio Prete title reappears, and they sort of handle the later conversations together. Chapters 26 through 28 is the end, and 26 and 27 are the proselytizer's despair, and then his nightmare that leads to his conversion. When he asks pardon from Zio Prete, when he begins his admission of guilt thusly: Padre, io sono un porco, un ingrato, un animale, in Italian in the text. Father, I am a pig and an ingrate and an animal. So it's a very kind of happy ending, but book is written with great relish. It's a very entertaining book, and as I said, very confident. So now I'm just going to, until it's time for, so I've got about 5 minutes to do some quotes from the text. I'll go through the different sections. So I'll show you some of the pictures. So here's a beautiful description of the church that was destroyed by coming up the Dan Ryan Expressway first. And they wanted to rebuild it, but then it ended up when the university came, they couldn't rebuild it. So here's this beautiful description. The mellow tints of sea and sky and the decoration of the interior from vestibule to the sanctuary are unmistakably Italian. The stained glass windows of St. Michael, St. Raphael, and the guardian angel carry the thoughts of the onlooker back to the basilicas of Rome and cause them to murmur the names of Italian masters. The statues of San Vito, Rocco, Lucia, and Sebastiano recall vividly to mind those Christian martyrs especially dear to the Italian heart, or Raphael's Madonna della Sedia tenderly clasped her divine bambino, seeming to look down with maternal solicitude upon the congregation gathered in reverential attitude and to assist at Holy Mass in their native tongue. So it's a very, okay, this one I'll skip. This is sort of an interesting name book. I think he chooses the names based on his Catholic education idea, because he wanted to give when he says that all the names come from, let's see. When he says that all the names come from feast days, Natale, Pasquale, Annunziata, Assunta, Concetta. And there's a little thing about Pasqualino's father, and who's a negative character in the book. Okay. There's a very interesting exchange here. I'll read this here. A lamentable feature of the society is that most of them hold their meetings. These are the different societies organized for charitable purposes or to venerate different saints among the parishioners at Holy Guardian Angel Church. A lamentable feature of the society is that most of them hold their meetings Sunday morning. Every society celebrates annually the feast day of its patron with a solemn high mass and a panegyric. The latter seem to be effective must invariably conclude with a fervent prayer invoking the protection of the heavenly patron upon all the members of society from every imaginable evil, temporal as well as spiritual. That's part of the local peasant culture brought over. Zipre fancied that upon one occasion he had delivered a very masterful discourse on the Blessed Virgin. To be precise, it was the feast of the Madonna di Montevigiano. He was, however, speedily disillusioned by the caustic criticism made by a poor woman upon leaving the church at the end of Mass. The priest says, Cosa viene pari? She was asked in regard to the sermon. Neanche una preghiera, she replied. Not even a prayer. Again, so the Irish Catholic and the Italian Catholic conflict is moved over there. Okay, now I just want to show you briefly the, okay, there's a lot. So these are the exchanges going on in the newspaper that he brings to life, and this is recurrent. So he calls Garibaldi an ignorant bushwhacker, notorious for demoniac hatred of the Pope. That's what Bishop Dunn calls him. But he was being attacked here. So maybe if you're interested in this, or you can find it online. But I think bushwhacker is the early 20th century term for a terrorist. I think. I think it corresponds in force to calling him. So just a little here. Okay, actually the school in the I put up Dante because the school diagonally across from the Guardian was called Dante School, and I think Father Dunn had helped that happen. And so they wanted to name the school. A new school is being built on Polk Street. Garibaldi, he was fighting their efforts. I don't know how it turned out. So they thought that they got to name the school after Garibaldi, but the whole thing is every Catholic knows that a priest would just as soon have the school named after Beelzebub, Bob Ingersoll, or Judas Iscariot. Bob Ingersoll, as you'd expect, is a leading atheist or agnostic at the time. So then he goes. Then he calls him the ignorant bushwash. Okay. The poor man has an acute case of Irish, Jesuit, and Pope phobia. So they're kind of interesting in colorful polemics, and also the ones who write against him. Okay, it's 12:15. I just, oh yeah, I thought he has a great description of Pasqualino, who's kind of the hero. Made me think of Salvatore Locascio, especially he was beautiful as a picture and lively as a cricket. That made me think of the old Cinema Paradiso representation of a Southern Italian. So then, yeah, then it all started at the zoo, actually, where there's this kind of nice image to be sober and wise because your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion goeth forth, seeking who he may devour. Well, that's what Pasqualino says to one of the first things he says when the debate starts, and it's taking place right at the zoo. That's the picture of the lion is from today, but that is a 1900 picture that you can find. Here, yeah, so the book is very pro-Pope, and there's a lot of confidence in the community about popes. And a couple that I refer to, he specifically refers to an encyclical of Pasqualino of Leo XIII, who's also the Pope associated with what we've been talking about at Loyola this year, the preferential option for the poor, for the rerum novarum. So the popes are interested in that era. And then, okay, so the despair is kind of great. He has this dream. First he tries to commit suicide, the proselytizer. Then he has this terrible dream in which he dreams that the devil is going to take his soul away. Okay, right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read a paper called Roman Catholicism, which is about an African-American writer. And you would say, why is he reading a paper on an African-American writer at an Italian-American conference? And, well, there's a very pragmatic reason. It's what I know. So it's very difficult to write about what you don't know. And second reason, it's the paper. So, William Motley's 1947 best-selling novel, Knock on Any Door, 1 million copies in 1 year. The story of an Italian-American kid named Nick Romano who goes from altar boy in Denver, Colorado to bisexual prostitute and low-key gangster in a Chicago multi-ethnic and racially mixed slum. It's a unique case in American literary history. His uniqueness is not that Motley was an African-American writer who wrote about an Italian-American character, because there is quite a history, actually. The specificity of Motley is that he was the first, and as far as I know, the only African-American Catholic writer to write about Italian-Americans. So my remarks today insist that to Motley, Catholicism is a non-institutionalized social-cultural form that allows him to overcome what Protestant discriminatory normativity and address the racial question in America as a question of inequality, exclusion, and lack of belonging. Motley, the Italian-American investment, is a reinvention of blackness as a way to experience human otherness as a signifier of inequality. This is the novel's first novelty, as well as the problem that Motley faces with today's literary critics, which for the most part seem both reluctant and unequipped to consider religion as a non-doctrinal concrete form of humanism when it comes to literary canon formation. Is the only a chance, for example, that in mainstream anthologies of American literature, there appear only two Italian-American writers, Piero Di Donato and Don DeLillo, both male, of course. Is the only a chance that neither of them is identified as Catholic, despite the evident influence that such a discourse had on them. And is the only a chance that neither of them is presented as an Italian-American writer, in spite of the fact that both are children of immigrants. Be mindful, this is not only an Italian-American issue, which is why I decided to take out Motley's novel for this conference. Motley knew all too well that he was working in the black literary tradition as a Catholic writer, the only such writer, given that Cobb McKay was a Jamaican-born. And that tradition had already dealt with Italian presence. It's found in modern texts, which is Jane Weldon Johnson, the Lombardi-Diop and ex-colored man. Likewise, in Sterling Brown's poem Harlem Happiness, we have the cohabitation of two couples, 1 black and 1 Italian Americans in the street of Ireland. And a year before Motley started writing Knocking on Any Door, William Hathaway had created a pro-Italian encounter between African American and Italian American male workers in the steel mills of Pennsylvania. In other words, Motley at once inheritor and shaper of a literary line that connects African American male writers to Italian immigrants and their children. It is not a coincidence, I think, that Frederick Lafayette reaches out to Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man when he defines Italian American as invisible people. Not on Any Door, however, he was the first fictional Italian American youngster that an African American writer has ever created. Motley was well equipped to do so because in the late 30s he had conducted a study of an Italian neighborhood in Chicago for the Federal Reserve Project, a study called Little Sicily, a 38-page manuscript written for the Illinois American Guide series, to which I return at the end of my introduction. The influence of this WDA fieldwork informs a structurally defined geography of the novel, beginning with its center urbanism. Unlike Hathaway's book On the Forge and Ellison Invisible Man, Knocking on Any Door does not go north. Nick Romano and his family, in fact, withdraw from the West. This is to say, the immigrant family withdraws from the frontier, a symbolic shadow of the American dream, due to the economic failure of the grocery store, which first forces the Romanos to move to the ghetto of Denver, where Nick's downfall begins, and then to relocate to Chicago. At the same time, by selecting an Italian American as main character in place of an African American, Motley avoided a seemingly mandatory northward migration of black writers. By withdrawing the Romano family, Motley renounced the narrative possibility that the frontier has always offered American writers, beginning with a book from which all American literature, modern American literature, comes from, as Hemingway told us, which is Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Yet my view is that Motley did not ignore these two thematic traditions. Rather, he reformulated them to what I call the invisible blackness of Italian Americans, the racially inflected protean dimension of immigrant humanism that allows Italian Americans to navigate between different racial realities, broadly conceived, by which I mean a notion of race that is not limited to a solely color-based dimension. This is why Motley locates Nick Romano at the center of a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multilingual proletarian street, Maxwell Avenue, where one can hear, quote, men and women shouting their wares in hoarse, rasping voices, Jewish words, Polish and Russian words, Spanish, mixed up English. And once in a while you heard a chicken cackling or a baby crying. The smell of hot dog, garlic, fish, steamed table, cheese, pickle, garbage can, mold, and urine smells, end quote. No wonder that Nick's Romano Italian American is primarily linked to race. The reason, of course, is that Motley was not an Italian American, which incidentally raises the question of what exactly is an Italian American novel, and conversely, what is an African American novel. But this is precisely what makes Nick Romano an interesting fictional character. Motley may not be a first-rate writer in terms of aesthetics and language execution. Ideologically, he moved progressively to the left after the end of the New Deal and at the onset of the Cold War. Stylistically, he found himself caught in between the end of modernism and the first pangs of postmodernism. In other words, he's a transition writer, but one who's extremely astute. This is how he described Nick Romano's hair. I quote, he put water on his hair and stood in front of the mirror, commenting, it won't stay down, it's too curly, end quote. His too curly hair is one of the many ciphers of Nick's invisible blackness, which Motley ties to his Catholic upbringing. In the reform school where Nick is sent after he covers up the misconduct of a friend, Nick cannot bring himself to say the N-word when he's asked to help another boy to wash the school's director's car. What happened to the Nick asked the other kid, meaning the African-American boy with a scared-to-death look in his face that Nick tries to approach before Big Stop. The racist and fascist-like dog of the school stops him to warn him, I quote, we don't talk to no niggers in here, end quote. Clearly, Nick does not feel that Big Stop personal pronoun we includes him. Neither does he feel that he belongs to that we. Just as Nick increasingly becomes aware of his invisible blackness, so does his yearning for belonging with the other side. Right after Big Stop born, Nick witnesses the school superintendent whipping Nick's friend Tommy, who attempted to escape from the school along with other kids, including Sam, the African-American that Nick intended to talk to. Nick gradually identifies with Tommy, who refused to submit to the Victorian normative laws of the reformed school, including its racial divide. Tommy is the exact opposite of Baxter, to whom defiantly responded, "I'll talk to anyone I want." When the kids who attempted to escape are brought back to the assembly hall, Sam sits next to him. Then Tommy is forced to pull down his pants, his buttocks naked for everybody to see, while the superintendent does his job with his strap. Quote, "The smack of the whip again, cut in the flesh, bringing the blood," end quote. Now, in the hands of an African-American writer, this image acquires a precise double meaning, the literal one of the text, and the allegorical one of African-American history. An injury to the body is what fuels mutual recognition. Although Tommy is a white kid, Motley was not. And it's right after Tommy's whip and the Knicks turns against everything that the reform school stands for, beginning with the crossing of the racial line, as he starts hanging out with Sam, the African-American kid, which eventually will force him to fight and be picked up. Neither does Nick accept the mission of the school that its director, Mr. McGuire, perhaps not coincidental a Scottish name, sums up as follows, quote, "Good habits, personal cleanness, honesty, obedience, cooperation, respect for property, and the use of clean language," end quote. Nick's hostility to this universe is not a naive juvenile revolt against the authority. Nick rejects this principle because the school's mission is accompanied of Puritan discipline, the founding principles of capitalist system, and bourgeois respectability. In one word, whiteness. And whiteness does not belong to Nick Romano, the Italian-American kid whose heirs took her. The whipping of Tommy is an indictment of the nation's past, as well as the cipher of capitalist repression that is unleashed against the unprotected, the weaker, those at the margins, the excluded majority. This is what Nick reacts to both the bourgeois modern world of white Protestant respectability, of which the reform school is a microcosm. In proper modern fashion, Nick becomes a displaced object of modernity that continuously attempts to invert its position and become a subject of a new modern world in ethics, which the passage of the plural microcosm of Chicago reflects. Belonging, finding a home in his work. This is what Nick strives for, to no avail. The modern world that Nick Romano faces for him a double estrangement. Not only does he live during the Great Depression, unlike the children and immigrants of Mount Allegro, for example, and other Italian-American literature at the time, Nick does not inhabit two different worlds, either the Italian at home and the white American outside at school. He inhabits neither. What he inhabits instead is a fictional universe that Motley imagines for him, the multiracial, multilingual, poor, sexually promiscuous neighbor, rotting with filth and crime on Maxwell Street. One, however, that includes a carnival street with a black orchestra and a racially mixed crowd during which, quote, "A lean young Negro black as the hat he wore came out of the crowd and asked a pretty Italian girl in her teens for a dance," end quote. An invitation that the girl accepts. In this world, Mediterranean respect stands as both other than and opposite to the world of the reform school, to whiteness. Nick Romano is the ideal fictional character to build such world because his invisible blackness keeps race and ethnicity simultaneously in play as he gradually descends in the underworld of West Madison, where there are, quote, "foreign appearing men but lighter than the Italians," end quote. Motley's original inspiration for Nick Romano was a Mexican teenager whom he had met in a reform school in Denver. The Italian-American choice, then, is both not an intentional way to address whiteness without following the typical black and white binary. This is clear when a cop stops Nick and his friends, Vito, Stash, and Sleepy, the latter an African-American, to ask this following question, to question their different nationalities. A question to which Nick replies, "There ain't nothing in this country." The response operates at two interconnected levels. To begin with, Nick reverses the superposition of the power relations between the institutional authority that speaks whiteness and the subaltern who have only their identity in each other. His questioning the policeman momentarily subverts the agency of power in its relationship, creating a positive shared space for the mutual recognition of their universality as the condition of equality and freedom that the addition of "in this country" to Nick's sentence underlines. Secondly, Nick subverts the idea of racial hierarchies, which he subordinates to the concrete practice of inclusion. Nick knows that inclusion is the precondition for everyone to be seen and belong. The public recognition that guarantees the possibility to make oneself feel at home in the world. It is, of course, Motley's strategy to raise the question of social inclusion, which in this country, as Nick says, cannot be detached from the question of whiteness. Underneath the skip-rolled verbal codes, the strictly theoretical presupposition, it raises many political questions, because the racial inclusion that Nick's invisible blackness fosters validates everybody's singularity as universal and the assembles of white normativity. Motley's investment in an Italian-American teenager took early her response to this politics. Moreover, although Motley shows how poverty is the fuel of crime, he does not sanitize Nick Romano. Unlike stereotypical Italian-American gangster, Nick trusts people outside his own ethnic group and culture. The most important difference, however, is the aesthetic difference that betrays his invisible blackness, his obsession with his look that his signature mark sentence immortalizes, quote, "Live a good life, die young, and have a good-looking corpse," end quote. The sentence may be catchy, right? But the message is clear. Beauty transcends even death, the essence, culturally speaking, of Catholicism, at least ever since Dante's Vita Nova. By transcending death, beauty rejects the continuous attempt of the word of whiteness to control, to frame Nick, to not see him and all those like him. In other words, Nick Romano is the original invisible man, not because of the cliché attached to him, but because nobody sees his invisible blackness, his Italian-Americanness, his popular Catholicism. Literary critics to begin with. As an Italian woman whose family, the Chicago Housing Authority, wanted to relocate elsewhere in the city, told Motley when he was collecting material for his WPA essay as to why she would have moved, and I quote, in Finnish, "We ain't gonna move. They don't want us in there. We're niggers."
Thank you very much. Fascinating. And I think we're going to have to continue the conversation over lunch. I think that Dominic and I did, maybe it was a mortal sin to ask a bunch of Italian Americans to eat lunch in 1 hour, as opposed to the 2 hours we had yesterday. Maybe 3 meal. But I'll certainly go to confession. We need to get to a new place for lunch, and we want to try to get